All right.
Well, the world will always demand the use of energy. Our most obtainable source of energy is fossil fuels. Now, these fossil fuels are actually what we use to power our technology, our communications, heating, and electricity. Now, with that being said, Alberta Energy states that most of the oil and natural gas being produced with conventional methods is already being procured. So as time and innovative technologies progress, we're now able to get these resources that were once unattainable. Resources, whether conventional or unconventional, will always remain a huge part of human society. I am genuinely interested in the terminology that is used within the oil and gas industry, as I want to see my career be within the industry itself. I've done research as well as taken classes that have motivated me to give this speech. In order to fully understand unconventional reservoirs, I will first go over why the term unconventional is used. Then I will explain the acquisition methods that are used to drill these types of reservoirs. And then lastly, I will uncover the impact that these methods have on the environment. First things first, I will explain conventional versus unconventional. As Alberta Energy explained, conventional reservoirs have pools of resources that you can drill into, where the natural gas and the oil will actually leave the reservoir rock naturally and flow up into the wellbore. Now, New Source Energy Partners continues to say that these types of reservoirs are very regional in extent and only have a thickness of up to about 500 feet. Now, these reservoirs may be small in volume, but they do exhibit low risk. And so there's high porosity and high permeability within these rocks, which means that there's better connected pore networks, so it makes it easier for fluid to flow and cheaper to develop. On the other hand, unconventional reservoirs have large volumes, but they are very difficult to develop. Unlike conventional reservoirs, unconventional reservoirs have lower permeability, where it's more difficult for oil and natural gas to flow through it naturally. In addition to poor permeability, these unconventional reservoirs have poorly connected pores, so production and the technology needed to produce from these wells is very expensive. But these new technologies have been developed in order to gain access to these very large, once inaccessible resources. Ultimately, Alberta Energy puts it as unconventional is simply referring to the properties of the rock where these resources are coming from, and then the methods that are used to produce from them. Speaking of methods that are used, how do you actually drill unconventional reservoirs? The term directional drilling comes to mind. A geosciences news and information source conveys that the purpose of a directionally drilled well is to actually reach resources that could otherwise not be drilled with only a vertical well. Drilling at an angle other than vertical allows these exploration companies to stimulate reservoirs in ways that they never could with just vertical drilled wells. Additionally, directional drilling can allow companies to access resources that are offshore from an onshore location site at a facility instead of having to drill an offshore, have to construct an offshore rig to gain access to those resources. Horizontal drilling has been around for decades, but most recently it's been paired with hydraulic fracturing in order to remove oil and natural gas from tight reservoir rocks. Alberta Energy Regulators describes this process beautifully when they say that hydraulic well fracturing is a process of pumping fluid into a wellbore to create enough pressure to cause cracks or fractures within the rock layers. Within the fracking fluids, there are proppants such as sands that help keep the fractures open. Now, this process allows oil or gas to be produced from these tight, low permeability, low porosity rocks. There are many people that are concerned with the aftermath of these methods on the environment. So it is important to know how these drilling methods affect the environment, and I will address the effects of horizontal drilling first. They seem to be a lot more positive in comparison with hydraulic fracturing. So as explained by APIA, an Australian oil and gas company, horizontal drilling is a technique that developed larger oil and gas resources from a single well. Essentially, companies can drill multiple wells from the same vertical well. And so that process of clustering these wells together actually disrupts a smaller surface area of land than opposed to 8 other wells that were drilled in different locations to get access to those same reservoirs. Now, there are multiple negative environmental impacts that are associated with hydraulic fracturing that environmental advocates are most concerned with. The first is being that those fractures that were created could start communicating with the naturally occurring fractures that could actually go through rocks that are used for drinking water. The second being that the casing of the well could fail and escape into drinking water supplies. And then the last is that fracking fluid could actually seep into the groundwater and contaminate ground surface water. But on a more positive note, hydraulic fracturing can make a previously unprofitable well very profitable, increasing the amount of resources that were acquired from that area. All things considered, there is no concrete definition for what unconventional means, but most active plays in North America are all unconventional plays. But a thorough enough understanding of unconventional reservoirs has been exhibited by first going through the terminology unconventional and conventional, then by giving the description of techniques that were created to access these inaccessible resources, and then lastly, describing the effect or the impact of these methods on the environment. Whew, almost there. Seeing as how this world will always need source of energy, having a general knowledge of these resources and their background knowledge is a beneficial thing to know. In closing, without these new innovative technologies, there would be a decrease in quantity of oil and gas that is able to be produced, and ultimately we would not see half as much as the energy that we need for human utilization.